Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Grear, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So on this edition of the Fatigue Files, I'm doing something a little different. It's a little bit of a monologue, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm calling it provisionally Mind-Body, Listening for the Body. Because there's something that's really been playing on my mind lately. In fact, it's been tugging at me for years and years, which is a kind of tidal pull of awareness, or a kind of sense of something that just emerges over and over. And this is a sense of needing to come home to the matter of matter. So it's always been there to a level in my life, at least as far as embodiment is concerned. I've always loved being in a body, even in the depths of my hideous illness. There's something about embodiment that just fills me with a sense of belonging and being at home. And of course, when I was a kid, I experienced it as, that lively little one climbing trees or kicking a football around. I always loved the sheer joy of muscular movement on a mountain bike or doing sports or exploring the sensory vocabularies of physical theatre, which I did for a number of years, practicing the martial arts, which I also did for a number of years. And then, of course, when my health collapsed, I had to become quite intimate with a whole new raft of tidal washings of bodily sensations in a very long dance with chronic illness. And then later, in my academic career, I began to do some exciting reading, thinking, and engaging around the theme of materiality itself, with imaginative academics who play extensively with the intelligence of the more than human in the world. And all that comes together in a really powerful way for me, in a real concern for what's often getting lost in conversations about chronic illness and recovery from chronic fatigue, which is really this centrality of the body itself as a form of multiple intelligences. I've noticed for many, many years, way back beyond my interest in materiality, a real failure in Western culture, and more recently I've noticed a failure in fatigue recovery culture, to really meet the body seriously enough. To meet it seriously enough as a deeply material organism made up of a multitude of deeply material intelligences, all the way down to the cellular movements that literally make up the daily movement of the body as flesh through the world. I mean, it's really extraordinary when you start to really look into it. So I'm looking for something more promising, I guess, than a rehash of the tired old body-mind split. I'm searching for a kind of resonance, for deeper sound, something expressing the need to rediscover, or perhaps even know for the first time truly, the bottom-up, emergent intelligence of the body itself. So often this is what's missing. We're missing so much about the body as a sensing, capable field of aliveness and as an intelligent field of meaning-making. The body has its own song of healing, and it goes far beyond the idea of listening to a pain and working with emotions, important as that work is. goes all the way down into evolutionary biology and the ancient ways of knowing that the body has and operates, even in its origins, its long, long time ago origins, as originally a single cell. So I want to do some thinking with some of this, and I hope you bear with me. So I'm going to position myself first, just by saying I'm a white Western woman, child of the global north. I'm English, I'm well educated, I'm relatively privileged, and that means there's a lot that I don't and can't know, and questions that I don't even know how to imagine, let alone form. So I know that what I'm offering here is limited. But having said that, I'm not going to retract a word of what I've already said, because I've spent a long time now feeling into the implications of materiality. I've been reading something called New Materialist Theory, looking at new materialist and health optimization science, the new biology, and I've been playing along with authors like Karen Barad with the idea of meeting the universe halfway, exploring along with authors like Jane Bennett the thing power that emerges in even the most ordinary of taken for granted day-to-day materialities. And so when I put all this together with the whole idea of healing, especially from a long-term complex chronic condition, I'm led inexorably all the way back to this lively organism, this body, the ground from which all human life is lived. This body, for so long marginalized in the West from full and loving attention. And I find it really ironic the extent to which the body itself gets sidelined in the name of the search for physical healing. And I can't help noticing how much the body's really been subjugated to a Western idea of the human mind, and how that's refracted even in some quite imaginative and important healing modalities. So I want to dip my toes in here, and I invite you to join me. So I'm going to kind of offer it as a series of reflections. It's not at this point particularly organised. It's the start of an invitation, really, to have a conversation on this really important theme. So if I think about modern medicine as our first port of call, our first reflection, that very much sees the body as fragments or categories or components, tends to respond to symptoms by stifling them with drugs. So there's a kind of attention that clusters around particular organs and functions. It's almost as if the body is just so many wet machine parts, kind of fleshy fragments, a disaggregated puzzle into which medicine and pharmacology peer in order to stifle symptoms, to tinker with systems, to master the body. I don't know about you, but for me, in my imagination, that's a very familiar white-coated, kind of shiny, machinic, fragmented approach to the body as that upon which we sort of act with our clever brains and shiny tools and targeted interventions. But it's worth stopping to think about the fact that at the moment on the planet, this pharmaceutical medical approach is the fourth largest cause of human death. We're getting something wrong there. Now, I want to turn my mind now to body-mind recovery approaches, which is kind of body and mind as hyphenated. A hyphen joins two words. A hyphen, however, also separates two words. There's a kind of paradox there, isn't there? Because the hyphen is an attempt, in a way, in this context, to reunite what should never have been split in the first place. But what I notice is how often mind somehow emerges as the leading priority, even in these approaches. How the body is often, not always, but often downplayed. So this hyphen, when it functions as a bit of a gap, how much, I wonder, does it replicate the earlier Western body-mind split? It's an interesting question because the body-mind split drives an epidemic of chronicities in the 21st century. So my question is, and I don't know the answer to it, is how much is the hyphenated body-mind recovery industry? How much is it in significant ways a subtle rehabilitation of an old problematic? Where is the emergent complex multiple intelligence of the body in this story? I don't always hear it as a priority or a value. And then there's another thing that comes to mind, which is contemporary spirituality and spiritual healing. In that context, this lively organism, this complex, lively, ancient organism that we call the human body, is so often rendered up as that which is to be transcended, escaped from, detached from, disidentified from, dissociated from. It all feels so normalized, doesn't it? So familiar, all this. And my question is, why would it not? Because in the West, the body was reduced over hundreds of years to being literally a mere home for a mind, a kind of body bag, a flesh container, a vehicle. Well, a vehicle for what? Well, for a mind, as I've already said. But what kind of mind? Well, it turns out we're a very particular kind of mind, which I'll come to a bit later. So where, you might ask, does this happen? This reduction of the body, this elevation of a particular kind of mind? Well, pretty much everywhere you seek to name. Religion, philosophy, science, law, politics, economics, and more. In fact, you could say, without exaggeration, the body-mind split lurks beneath almost every area of the contemporary life world of Westerners. So is it surprising then when healing approaches and spiritualities tread that very path? Okay, they do it differently and they wear different clothing, they carry different paraphernalia, but is that hyphenation, body, mind, in a certain way, a kind of continuity? Not a rupture so much as an altered thread, a partial rehabilitation. People even conscious of that underlying philosophical chasm between mind and body? Is it just being reenacted? It's certainly something worth thinking about, though. So let's continue. In the European West, that particular long-standing view of the body as just a vehicle for a mind, as somehow much less than mind, as somehow a kind of object, or simply sinful flesh, or as somehow a wet machine, or as somehow a site for the production of labour in the marketplace, or just a site of consumption, or a mere receptacle for that mind, that calculative, proto-mathematical, analysing mind. We're all really soaked in that to layers that we perhaps can't even appreciate. So if we ask ourselves now, in a culture that has over a long arc of time reduced the body in that way, how is the body meant to flourish? I want to step into a thought space with philosophy for a moment, because philosophy never stays on pages or in books or in libraries after all. Philosophy forms part of the tacit ways in which we co-imagine our world. It constitutes what scholars like to call an imaginary, which is a whole way of experiencing the world collectively as mediated by structures that surround us and make that particular reality feel plausible. Philosophies shape imaginaries as reality tunnels, imaginary shape the meaning of the world as powerfully as water shapes the movement, physiologies, and habits of fish. And there in Western philosophy is a particularly powerful foundation for the body-mind split of the West. Because in Western rationalist philosophy, we find a really powerful culprit in the dysfunctional relating that our culture does with the lively organisms that we are. So I want to take a book down from the shelf for a moment, which is called Philosophy in the Flesh, written by Lakoff and Johnson. And Lakoff and Johnson make a really important argument. They argue that when philosophers have been answering the great questions about what's here, about how we know what we know, how we even know what's here anyway, they've made a massive mistake. See, there's this thick strand of Western philosophy, which is strong and fibrous, almost like a massive tree root. And it carries along with it certain fundamental assumptions. And the most powerful one of these, arguably, is this whole idea of the body as a container for a mind, and the mind as reason. And that reason, that kind of reason, as fundamentally disembodied. That means that reason itself has no body, it's bodiless. And in Western philosophy, reason was often seen as that which transcends or escapes the fleshy thing from which reason emerges. And it was this kind of reason, this disembodied mind, that Western philosophy presupposed. And it's that kind of disembodied reason that was long thought to separate the human from the animal, at least according to this long, long Western reality tunnel. Now that is the mind-body split. This is the place where reason breaks free of the messy flesh, where mind ascends, where body's just this extended thing, much like everything else that's not this particular mind. And that's the great mistake. Lakoff and Johnson argue that this great mistake is now unsustainable. So if the body-mind split is unsustainable, why is it unsustainable? Lakoff and Johnson argue that second-generation cognitive science undermines that entire dominant strand of Western philosophy. In other words, it undermines the entire dominant strand of philosophy that has quietly unwritten the whole of our Western social imaginary. And this science, second-generation cognitive science, unambiguously establishes that most thinking is both unconscious and embodied. And that means, according to Lakoff and Johnson, that all the core concerns of philosophy, like the nature of time, the nature of morality, causation, the mind, the self, and more, all of that relies heavily on basic metaphors. And these basic metaphors are always and inescapably drawn from embodiment itself, from embodied, lived experience. The brain evolved in the body, is part of the body, and is always fundamentally about the body, as Antonio Damasio puts it. What it means is that our basic ways of understanding reality, the metaphors that underlie things like the nature of time, the mind, the self, like really fundamental things, pivotal to the way that we even construct the world, those basic metaphors are not drawn from disembodied universal reason. They're not drawn from a freestanding mind. There is no mind-body split. It only ever existed in the imagination of human beings, apart from the fact that it exists in multiple ways because ideas don't stay in heads. They manifest in the world in material forms through how we organize and collectivize our social lives together. And this is really, really powerful stuff because human thinking, including the reason for so long thought to be universal and transcendent, emerges from the unconscious nature of bodily experiences. The body is how reality even makes sense. And what that means is, I'm going to say it straight, the mind-body split is bullshit. So what do we know now? The brain is part of a body. That body is a highly intelligent field of perception. That body is a tidal swell of lively communications between multitudes of microagencies, biota, viruses, cells, neural tissues, distributed between the brain and the skull, the heart and the gut, nerve highways, chemical signals, and on and on and on. Waves of profoundly material flows moving in multiple directions, intelligently, meeting in convergences, reaching out through tributaries of difference, distinction, expansions, a vast sea of impulses, movements, actions, reactions, all moving in flocks and herds and patterns and dynamics through layered fields in signals, pushes, pulls, transit, penetrations, membranes, pulses of electromagnetic communication, neurotides of meaning-making, and so much more. The body is not just intelligent and complex. It's more intelligent and complex than we can even imagine. And all the while, there's that incredible, amazing brain in the head, closed into its bony space, shut into the darkness there, completely reliant on this tide of information for making its predictions and its patterns of prediction. When you look at all that, doesn't the body-mind split fantasy look pretty shabby and thin? How misguided it is. It's just the wet dream of men who lived long ago, whose fantasy of disembodiment was precisely an attempt to leave the body behind for all sorts of reasons I don't need to go into here. And even the wonderful human mind, yes, it really is miraculously amazing. Even the wonders of the human mind should no longer distract us from searching for the body as ground, the body as this genius sea of becomings. So where in so many of the conversations about body-mind healing is this appreciation of the body and its incredibly multiple intelligences? Why does it just get pushed aside as the least important side of a hyphenation? Why continue with any subtle rehash, no matter how well-meaning, of any underlying structural myth of Western disembodiment? See, because when we really grasp the evolutionary intelligence of the body as a lively organism which evolved from millennia of relationships, starting with that very earliest single-cell organism, when we really grasp that, is it not better to take a position of profound humility and respect? Is there not an invitation here to respond willingly to the sheer intelligence of millennia of non-human interactions and ways of knowing? I mean, if we just think of just two simple examples out of a whole myriad that, the complexity and intelligence of this thing is beyond description in many ways. But if we just take two simple examples, so we've got the signaling relationships between mitochondria and microbiota. Those signaling relationships are the constant managerial communications that govern the production of metabolic well-being. An entire cellular communications web operating a 24-hour flow of meaning-making of its own. Secondly, if we think about just light and dark as signaling, because these mitochondria and other cellular intelligences evolved millennia ago precisely in responsive movement to the light and dark of our home planet, in response to the position of the nearest star, the one we call the sun. Light, dark, light, dark. Every cell understands this shifting signification more deeply than we can even consciously know. which is why health optimization science now explores using light to modulate human biology, and why photobiomodulation, as it's called, is such an important health practice. Those are just two examples in this vast intelligent complexity of the lively organism that we call the body. In the light of that, how can we continue to even think of the body as a limitation or as something in the way of what we, inverted commas, want? What does that we even mean, understood apart from the body? And how, looking at the 21st century deluge of chronicities, including eco-chronicities and the breaching of really important Earth system tipping points, and looking at the sheer death drive of neoliberal capitalism as it ravages the planet and financializes all of life, how can we, on a healing journey, how can we responsibly ignore the fact that it's precisely the disembodiment assumed by the ways in which we've arrived at this point in human history that lies at the heart of the issue? How does bypassing the full significance of bodily intelligence help? So I suspect that we Westerners have not yet learned, even in the body-mind orientated fatigue healing community, have not yet learned to take bodily materiality seriously enough on its own intelligent terms. So where does this lead at this point? I think it leads me to this recommendation of just turning to the body as teacher. I want to recommend that we should all learn to work with the body as an intelligent assemblage of intelligent patterns and systems in its own right. What does that mean? Well, maybe it means three things just for now, provisionally. First, it means respecting the evolutionary intelligence of the body. Health optimization science that leans into cellular research and explores the deep implications of evolutionary biology is already leading the way on this. The more we understand, the more we'll understand what the body needs. And in knowing what the body needs and in cooperating with the lively organism that we are, we can allow the body to reassert its own unique homeostatic dynamics. Complicated? Might sound so because of the language I use, but it's not really. This is just a return to simple practices: circadian hygiene, nutrient sufficiency, respecting the various lively microbiomes of the human organism, adequate hydration, rhythmic light and dark exposure, movement, social connection, and yes, of course, also using all that we know about psychology in the mind and its relationship with embodied functioning and more besides. And that includes, by the way, understanding the movements within the body and the way in which that influences and produces our psychology. It's not all a top-down journey, and we have to stop thinking about it in those terms. Secondly, this invitation to treating the body as teacher means really tuning into somatic sensory self-relating. I think there's a really deep invitation here to really feel into the body as both the metaphorical ground and the literal space of emergent thought shaping through which the brain maps and expresses memory and meaning. We can find that through the wisdom of the organism as a whole, we can access unconscious framings through which the brain constructs experience. We can begin, in other words, to touch the unconscious implicit dynamics that run as tributaries in the archaeology of what we take to be ourselves, using somatic sensation as a powerful guide. We can find our own bodily ways to relate to the emergent complexity of ourselves as lively material systems. We can cultivate a sensing, attuned relationship to how we, as organisms, experience everything in our worlds, inner and outer. And we can exercise intelligent, respectful agency in shifting our experience and learning to heal by becoming healers in partnership with the organism that we are. And third, and most of all, and I mean this most seriously, it means dropping that bullshit fantasy about disembodiment. Just drop it. Drop the whole body-mind split nonsense. No matter how rehabilitated, no matter what clothes it rocks up in, we should just drop it. It's time to come home to the body, not as something hyphenated, not as mere flesh, not as a vehicle for a mind or for a soul, but as a highly intelligent sea of communicative intelligences. I believe it's time to come home to the miracle of materiality itself, to ourselves as earth beings, evolved over long earth time, as emergent agents from a world far more agentic in its own right than the Western fantasy has ever allowed. Perhaps in a future podcast, I'll reflect on this in relation to spirituality and on the importance of fully embodied spiritual practice. For now, though, I invite you to come home to yourself as a body being, an earthling, a wonderfully intelligent organism and assemblage. Let's embrace all the layers of being and become healers all the way down, attuned to the multitudes of the ancient, more than human dynamics that we also are. This is my first punt at starting, I hope, a wider conversation in our wider healing community about the importance of really understanding the multiple intelligences of this absolutely amazing, lively organism that evolved over a long time to become what we call human beings.